Hello, and welcome to the second episode of the Prime Time Podcast, hosted by myself, Primus. In this episode, I'm going to be going over the build process for one of my recent builds, Shadow Lord Tahu, which is an evil version of Tahu, who was the Toa of Fire in the first generation, and he's the Master of Fire in the second generation. So the reason that I decided to build an evil version of Tahu was there was a contest going on, and the contest was called Legends and Infamy, where you took a known good character and made them evil, or you took a known evil character and made them good. And the prize for that contest, for the grand winner, was a Generation 2 art book. So it was pretty enticing to enter. And I have this prototype Haunuva, which is Tahu's mask, and I had wanted to use it in a build. So I thought that this would be a good time to do so. It doesn't exactly match Tahu's regular mask because it's transparent and it's got this pretty cool red pattern on it. So I thought it would be a good jumping off point. I knew that I had the mask, and then I had the idea that I was going to make an evil Tahu. And that's not usually how I build. Usually how I build is I just dump my parts all out on my desk, or, back in the day on my floor, and just kind of build from there. I just start putting parts together, and, when I start getting an idea of what I want, after putting those parts together, then that's when I start really solidifying the build. So for this one, it was a little bit different. I knew that I wanted to make an evil Tahu. And as you see in this first work in progress, or whip picture, I had a really rough idea for him. I wanted him to have these big, bulky shoulder pauldrons that I used Winua Metru masks for. And I wanted him to be holding the Mask of Life. And somebody had later pointed out to me that Tahu wouldn't have cared about the Mask of Life. That was way later on in the story. And BS01 is the story-related site, so I kind of wanted to stick towards, something that appealed to the story crowd. So I swapped out the Mask of Life for the Mask of Time. Which you'll see in the later pictures that he's not holding the Mask of Life anymore. But the original idea was, he's going to be kind of this lanky, Grim Reaper type character. He has in this picture, he has a scythe for his one arm. And he goes and he kills his Toa team and Makuta and everybody because, he's a bad dude. And it kind of changed off of that as I continued to build him. Obviously he's still a bad guy, but I didn't think that the Grim Reaper vibe really fell with him. And, I transitioned from a lanky build to a more stocky build, as you can see in this picture. I started giving him, all of these tubes because I wanted to have extra texture going on in his armor and in his torso. And, I wanted to add spikes to his armor, which you can see now he has spikes, on his shoulder pauldrons, and he's got this spiky bit coming out at his torso. And originally I had him attached to a base plate. I was going to make a scene for him, but I didn't feel like that scene would be very fitting. And I couldn't really get the scene that I was visualizing in my head to really show in Lego, which happens more often than you think. So now that I had this stocky, he's going to be more heavily armored. He's going to be more of a warrior type guy is kind of where I went with him next. And so since he was going to be this warlord imposing, I wanted him to have fire coming out of him, to have these big spiky hands and just very sharp, angular design to him. and I wanted all of his armor to be pretty angular as well. And so I added these flame pieces to his shoulder pauldrons, like he's got flames literally just coming out of his armor, and he's got a flame in his hand. Like he's still very much in tune with his element of fire, but it's not very controlled. Like he's just got this very big expression of rage and anger. So, and then this kind of sat around for a day or two, and then I got back to it. And when I came back to it, I kind of wanted to tie more into the story. So then I tried having these tendrils, like shadow tendrils coming out of him. And on the tendrils are the masks of his Toa team, like, Gali and Kopaka, Onua, Liwa, Pohatu. I don't think I missed anybody. But and Takanuva too, the Toa of Light. Like he had all of the masks coming out of him, and those mask powers would be channeled into him. That was the idea that I had, that I was trying to represent with these tendrils, that he's killed all of his friends, and now he's using their mask powers and their powers as Toa to fuel his tyranny. That was kind of the idea that I had. I don't think that I was ever able to convey those shadow tendrils. Like they just kind of looked tacked on, and it was kind of a weird looking concept. It was kind of cool in concept, I thought, but I don't think that my execution really sold it. So then I went back to the heavily armored warlord look. And it turns, I guess, Wenua parts just happened to be gold mines for armor for me, as I used some Wenua Hordika heads as his thighs. And again, this is where I had these very sharp, angular shapes. Like there's these hard lines in his thighs, and then he's got spikes coming out near his knees. And I just kept on trying to repeat those shapes and textures throughout the mock, and that was something I kind of talked about in my previous build, the focus on the shape and texture of the guy, even though his color palette is pretty muted, like it's all black, and I wanted him to be all black armor because it's like, he's been fully corrupted by the shadows, so he doesn't have any other color on him other than the transparent mask. And that was kind of the idea with that, was that like the mask has been drained of all of its color. It's like a very raw mask now. It's not specifically suited to a Toa. It's to this being that is more than a Toa. Now he's this heavily armored kind of fighter brawler type character. And as I've been building him, I've been posting these work in progress photos to Discord servers asking for feedback. And at this point, somebody pointed out, hey, I think the legs are a little short. And again, like as I said in my previous video, proportion plays pretty heavily into the visuals of your build. So I took that into consideration. I ended up taking apart his lower legs entirely, and I just replaced them with these kind of placeholder limbs. They were literally just Technic connectors, just so I could get a visual of the proportions with longer lower legs. And I liked how that looked. So then I kind of figured out how to make new lower legs based on that feedback. And it was pretty cool. I got to use some parts that I really have been liking to use, like these train wheel pieces. I used them in the lower legs and in the upper legs as well on this build. So it was cool to get to do that, because I've been really enjoying those parts. So at this point too is when I added in, this giant mitt of fire coming off of his hand. Again, that was to show his, his connection to his element, as well as to the fact that it's kind of been corrupted. Like his whole hand is on fire. It's not really like under control. It's just blazing. So, and that's kind of just how like the build evolved, right? It literally just jumps from like one step to another step as I build. for me anyways, it's how the process works, is that, I start out with an idea and it just kind of snowballs from there. So, and it helps too. Like I used to not post work in progress photos at all. I used to not take them, and I would just build a thing, post it online, and call it done. And now what I found is that by posting these work in progress pictures and asking for feedback during the build process, I actually end up posting more polished builds, I would say. Like I feel that a lot of my older works, like from 2010 or so, have some really rough elements to them, whereas my builds, from 2017, 2018 have been very polished in comparison. So that's just kind of like a little retrospective thing, is that like posting them before they're finished has helped out a lot in my build process. And I would say, in general, feedback helps out a build anyways. So then in this photo here is basically his final version. I think there were maybe a few little details that I changed up to him before I would go and take final photos. But otherwise, this is basically a completed build. And again, I would take this photo and post it online, ask for some feedback, and at this point, like, you can't see everything. I haven't taken a picture of his back or anything. You can't see that I've added spikes to it or what I've done in the back. But the general idea is, like, the overall shape, overall idea and message are conveyed to the viewer. So then I took this build after I decided it was done. I took it down to my photography setup, because I kind of treat photography as a second hobby in regards to Lego. I really think that having good presentation for a build elevates a build, because, then the viewer can see all of the build, and they can really appreciate a lot of the things that you can't see in a bad photo. and also, like, you're building a 3D model that what it looks like, and you get to see it in person, but you can't convey all of that to a person that's just viewing it on a computer screen. So I do my best. I want to show all the little details that I can, especially since a lot of my stuff ends up being mostly black, which can be very hard to show in a 2D image. So I try to take, due care taking photos of my builds. So with this one, I also decided, like, even the background was going to play a role into developing his character. Like, I wanted to have a red background because it reminds me of, like, blood and fire, and just, it really stands out. Like, I wanted it to stand out against the rest of the competition, as, like, even from the thumbnail, you see this bright red background. Like, what is that? I'm going to check that out for the contest. So then, when I take photographs, I take, like, hundreds of photographs. A lot of the initial photographs will be just checking my settings on my camera to see, do these settings work for this build, or I'm going to have to tweak them slightly. And then I'll take photos of a bunch of different angles and try to get different poses and move them around to show off the best of the build, basically. And then once I have all these photos, I'll go through all of them, and I'll find maybe 10 to 12 that I really, really like. And then I will edit those 10 to 12. I'll crop them. I'll adjust the brightness and the contrast and the saturation, fiddle with the highlights and the shadows so that you can see a little bit more details. I won't even use all of those photos sometimes, and then I'll take, a handful of those photos, post them to a gallery, and then upload a main photo to Flickr, which is where most Lego builders post their builds, is on Flickr. That seems to be the main hub. So as you can see in this comparison, like, this is the pre-edited photo, and then this is the post-edited photo. I've messed with the colors a bit, so it really is a much stronger impact to the viewer.
So yeah, I mean that's kind of the whole build for him is he just kind of, as every time I sat down to him, something changed and my direction changed until it started honing in on a singular idea. And that's really how my build process usually is that I just start building. And a lot of times it actually makes it tough for me to enter contests because my process just kind of goes whichever way it goes. Is that if I sit down with an idea, a lot of the times I'll really struggle to execute on that idea just because, like, as a build progresses, sometimes it'll go away from what my original idea was. So to keep that on track is a task for me. But that's just kind of how my personal build process is. The general build process, I would think that, sitting down with an idea and like sketching it out or, having a rough shape that you're thinking of would be just a good way to go into a build. And I know a lot of other builders, will even like do full sketches and mock-ups and stuff like that for their builds going into it. And, good for them. But that's just kind of the thought process that I have. And, yeah, I mean, that's really all there is to this mock. I can't really think of anything else about him. So, with that being said, I hope you enjoyed this podcast. And if you haven't seen it, check out my other podcast talking about visual language, because I try to touch on that a little bit earlier in this video. So yeah, I hope you enjoy the series, and let me know if you have any feedback. Comments and likes and such are appreciated.